TV, welcome to Real Talk. It's really nice to be back with you. I'm sorry I wasn't here last week. My colleague Mufti Yusuf, who's with me tonight, very ably covered the program with IQRA Butt, and I'm grateful to him. I'm also grateful to people who sent me messages of an early recovery. It was just one of those small bouts of flu that laid me down a little bit. So I'm really glad to be back today here, and I hope inshallah that again, like as usual, you will find that today's program is going to be informative, it's going to be interesting, it's going to be challenging, and it is going to provide us with some information that will help us as a Muslim community to move forward with some of the profound issues that confront us as a community. Today, I'm really pleased to have with me Ishtiaq Ahmed, who is the Chief Executive of a not-for-profit charity based in Bradford called Sharing Voices, which is specifically established to look at developing services and provision for people who have a mental health issues and suffering mental health within the citizenship of Bradford. So Ishtiaq, welcome to IQRA TV.
Thank you.
Very pleased to have you here.
Thank you.
I also have with me our honorary president, life president, member of this panel, as you might want to say, is Mufti Yusuf Akuri, who's now, as you know, has turned tables on me. I used to be on the other side. He's now joined the other side. Mufti Sahab, thank you for coming back, and thank you for being with us today, and thank you for last week as well. But today, as I say, we want to talk about mental health. And you have a charity called Sharing Voices, which the aims are to reduce mental health issues and conflicts that people have within, and the inequalities around mental health within the BME community. And you work across all communities, don't you?
We do indeed, yeah. We was founded in 2002 after the government had commissioned an inquiry into the Dave Rocky Bennett issue, where it was a black chap who was detained under the Mental Health Act, and whilst in detention he was killed. So, and as a result of that, we was born as an organisation to look at some of the health inequalities that exist amongst the black and minority ethnic communities. So some of the founding members were from medical backgrounds, who were consultant psychiatrists, and also people from the mental health field as well. So as a result of that, really our aims and objectives were to look at some of the health inequalities, but also to ensure that some of the services that were being delivered in the Bradford district were equitable and accessible by all the different communities that reside here. So you have a predominantly large South Asian Pakistani Muslim community, but you also now have a growing Central Eastern European community as well. So we have dedicated workers that work with South Asian communities, with Central Eastern European communities, African Caribbean, refugees and asylum seekers, and now, of course, we've had an influx of refugees from the Middle East, i.e. Syria. So we have a Syrian support worker, CDW, that works to support those from that
And you also
community.
work with young people and the elderly
Of course, yeah. We have a dedicated older people's worker.
Yeah.
We have 3 children and young people's worker. Initially we had 1, but it's an area which has grown over the last few years, and the demand is much more now. They provide an outreach service to the local community centres, and also work very closely with the schools as well. So they deliver lots of workshops around mental health awareness, confidence building, and of course there's lots of triggers amongst young people around mental health. That could be anything from body image, self-image, to bullying. Bullying online, of course, now is a major issue as well. So we try to kind of cover the kind of vast range.
So do you work in schools as well, or do you?
We do, yeah. We provide an outreach service to many schools across the district. Of course, we're limited with the resources, but we predominantly work in the inner city schools where we have high populations of BME. BME meaning black and minority ethnic communities. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, mental health is an issue that has confronted us in the sense it's challenged us. We've not recognized mental health for what it is for many, many years.
Sure.
And I think that has been one of the reasons why we as a community have not really tackled this issue around mental health. And I think in the past we've been ashamed of it. People who have people within the families who may suffer from mental health have been reluctant to access services. And do you find that as one of the issues that confronts you?
It's still one of the major issues, yes, of course. I think the biggest issue is the stigma attached to mental health. And for cultural reasons, people feel a sense of perhaps a shame or generally a lack of understanding around mental health. So part of our work is to work with the communities to ensure that we're creating an awareness around mental health, looking at early triggers, how we can intervene earlier on, what are the signs of mental health. It could be depression, it could be social isolation, lack of kind of friends. So those are some of the kind of indicators. But our work entails, perhaps it's two-pronged. One is about kind of working with the service providers, which are the statutory services, and the other is with the communities. On the statutory side, it's about ensuring that the services are equitable, they're accessible, and that we're part of the kind of policy and decision making to ensure that the services that are designed are appropriate for the different demographics that reside in our city. But from a community perspective, it's about awareness, it's about working with individuals, working with community organisations to create a greater awareness around mental health. But yeah, unfortunately, some of those stigmas are still prevalent in our communities, and we have to kind of tackle those to kind of bring down some of those taboos.
I'll come to the issue around mental health in Islam. It's really good to have Mufti Yusuf with us, because I mean there's this issue about culture and mental health and faith and mental health.
Sure.
Now there was some work done last year where in Leeds, I think it was, where there was work done around faith and mental health, and they proved to a certain extent that people who had mental health issues, that if they were worked with around faith, they'd help them actually overcome some of those the issues that they were tackling and they were confronted with. Now we'll come back to that in a minute. But in terms of provision, obviously, as we now see with austerity and cutbacks within the NHS, I mean, I know that in the past provision wasn't not the best, and there was a real lack of understanding of mental health needs within the NHS for the BME community. I mean, how is that? Has that changed, or is it still the same? Do we still see deficit in terms of service provision that they provide? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, I guess it's a lot better than it used to be. In terms of trying to understand some of the needs of the BME communities. But there, of course, there's still gaps within the services, and always will remain. But our approach has always been the community development model approach, as opposed to the medical model. And that's not to say that we reject the medical model. We work alongside the medical model. But our role is to ensure, that people can, define their own mental health, and secondly, for them to define their own recovery pathways. And one of the pathways that perhaps that is quite prevalent amongst, especially the Muslim community, is to use faith and spirituality as a way of a recovery path. So for us, it's about giving people the choices that they want, in terms of them defining their own recovery path, as opposed to us imposing those services. Now, going back to your question that you said about, are there gaps within the service and provisions? Of course there are gaps, right? Yeah, and that hence the reason why you have the inequalities within the services. So, and there's lots of factors that trigger that. One is, it's kind of poverty, deprivation, lack of employment, lack of opportunities, racism, discrimination within the services as well. But we have come a long way in Bradford, where now we have BME representation at commissioner level in Bradford from BME backgrounds. We also have representation in the Care Trust as well, who are continually providing the kind of feedback around what are the needs amongst the BME communities. So we have focus groups, we have groups that kind of feed back to us about their services. But unfortunately, there's still the stigma, and going back to this, is the cultural issues about the kind of feeling ashamed of having somebody within your family who has a mental health issue.
Let me just bring Mufti Yusuf in here, because we just touched on faith and spirituality. Obviously, that's a huge area, particularly in the community that we are surrounded by in this area. Around, like you say, very large Muslim Pakistani population. Predominantly, and we have many mosques here and madrasas and institutions. Where do you see their role? You can answer that as part two of your question, the question to you. But in the general, in terms of mental health and its position within Islam.
Thank you. Something I was going to ask you both, and especially Ishtiaq. I see this as a massive role first and foremost, we've got to look at the prophetic traditions and how the masjids were the center of communities for everything. And something we often forget when building or making new masjids, new builds, especially now, and what the purpose of a masjid is. Masjids are not just there for males only, first and foremost, and they're not only there for your 5 daily prayers. Masjids would have been your center hub for everything, for social, for economics, for entertainment as such, and having fun. Where you had in the Prophet's time, Prophet's era, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they would have Eid time, Eid games as such. You know, they would
around the masjid,
in the area, in the courtyard, and doing wrestling and doing different things, different activities, where you'd receive and meet guests from different countries, etc. Sort of a parliament an area. Moving on from there, more importantly, you'd have areas for women, children, everything else. We've lost that sense of belonging and unity and an area where people have. Where our masjids, soon as the salat time is finished, locked up and gone.
Goes home, yeah.
And many a time we'll have people passing by here as well as many other areas. Oh, brother, sister, can we pray namaz? Why? Masjids are closed. I mean, you know, masjids are there. That's one thing. More importantly, mental health. Now, where do we begin? Many of our viewers, especially the elder generation, what are they on about? What's mental health? How do you define it? The breakdown of families, the breakdown of communities, breakdown of societies have led to many things. Unfortunately, you have now self-harm in children and something Ishaq alluded to, that they've from 1 practitioner to 3 practitioners in young people. Right. Whether it's bullying, whether it's the social media area,
that's right,
and whether it's area of belonging and keeping up with the Joneses and the Smiths, and that kind of peer pressure on young teenage boys and girls and how they fit in. Or it's simply that they have nobody, or there's nobody to talk to. And sharing voices, what a name, fantastic. You know, nowadays more often than not.
But where do you see Islamic institutions then playing a role? I mean, like,
everywhere.
We have madrasas here, we have mosques here.
Regardless of your madrasas,
right.
I mean, madrasas is an educational thing. The mental health area, where I see the chaplaincy role or the imam's role is much more wider and bigger. Unfortunately, our imams are suppressed and kept to leading the Jummah and Salat and doing the khutbah, and that's it. Where you have other faiths, and you take a leaf out of other faiths and understand how they have their roles as vicars, as parish priests or rabbis and etc. Whether they're visiting the elderly or the sick or vulnerable, somebody who's terminally ill, or whether somebody who is at hospital going through a bad phase or suffering mental health. You'd have someone to talk to. Isn't
that a mental sort of a conditional thing that over the years, particularly in the Asian subcontinent, an imam's role has been defined as such, and not the way that you've described with other faiths. But again, I mean, that is a deficit. But coming back to Ishtiaq's work and the area that he works in, we talked about mental health as being an issue. I mean, in terms of the proportionality, something, I've always been sort of fascinated by. In your experience, in terms of proportionality, do you find that disproportionately there are more mental health issues and factors within the BME community as opposed to the other communities?
Yeah, there is an overrepresentation within the mental health system from those from BME backgrounds, and especially from the black community. There is a huge overrepresentation from the black community, because there is this perception that black people, they can speak loudly, their kind of body language is a bit different, so they are perceived to be more aggressive. So therefore they will be administered some of the most harshest antipsychotic drugs compared relatively to the other communities.
Even though they may not have a mental health issue.
Even though may not have a,
of
course, as a mental health issue. But there is that perception, that they do have a mental health issue.
So that is a fault of the institution, isn't it?
Of course there is, yeah, absolutely. And
so there's a fundamental fault in the institution.
Lack of understanding
exactly,
of how communities operate, So therefore, you know, there is a massive overrepresentation. But of course, there's lots of factors that kind of trigger mental health in terms of, as you know, poverty, deprivation, lack of employment, language is an issue as well. So those who enter the kind of complex mental health system, are not aware of their rights as a patient. They're not aware of what services are available to them and what services they can access. So when they have a lack of understanding, you know, and lack of opportunities to be able to express themselves, we're also kind of looking at the cultural sensitivities. There's no point having somebody from a South Asian background going for counselling therapy to somebody who's from a white background, because they're not going to be able to understand contextually their culture or their religion.
Just, I mean, you've touched the point that we wanted to talk about.
Massive point he's raised there, and
Yeah.
I think institutions, whether it's the NHS, whether it's police, whatever we're talking about here, there's a massive gap in understanding cultures. I'm not even going on into religions, just cultures within their own. And maybe that's why we are having over-representation in the BME community. Who knows? I mean, that's Ishtiaq's area of expertise, and he can...
Yeah. I mean, if you just track back a little bit, the question is, the triggers of, you know, mental health in inverted commas, as you said, deprivation, lack of under-education,
bereavement,
under-education, underachievement, you know, lack of opportunities, etc., in employment, you know, whatever you may take. But I mean, if you look at the predominantly white communities in the rural areas, they, in terms of deprivational indexes, they probably have the same deprivation indexes as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So the question, therefore, is, do they have the same proportional level of mental health issues suffered by people who are in those categories, as opposed to people who are in inner city areas where they have similar deprivations as well? And if yes, then obviously there's some correlation there. If no, then the question is, why is it that one community is predominantly suffering more as opposed to the other one, where they have the same level of deprivation affecting them in their communities?
No, of course, I totally agree. I think there are pockets of deprivation amongst white communities also,
yes, they are.
if not perhaps more intense than some of those from BME backgrounds. But I guess the fundamental difference is that those people will access services much earlier than those from BME backgrounds. And that is because of cultural reasons. Families will actually intervene, they will speak to the GPs, schools will pick it up earlier as well.
Do you, on Muslim communities then, let's focus on the Muslim community. Families will access intervention early in non-Muslim communities. Do you think that one of the reasons why in the Muslim community families will not access medical services, and do they access other means of redress?
Yeah, of course.
In your opinion?
Yeah, of course. And we see lots of people who will have gone to beers and so kind of spiritual healing. And unfortunately, a lot of the times they will be visiting the charlatans, okay, who are not interested in giving them any real meaningful spiritual healing, but are more interested in how much money they can make. Let's be honest, right? Okay, it's a very controversial subject, right? Yeah, but I'm going to say what I need to say. Very few qualified people from the Muslim background in this country are there who have a clinical background or a clinical understanding of psychology or psychiatry that can understand and provide a meaningful intervention from a faith and spiritual perspective. Unfortunately, a lot of people will attend and visit these individuals, and eventually they will still end up coming through the medical system. Some.
Mufti Sahab, your opinion on this?
I agree wholeheartedly, and I think it's become more of a problem than a solution to those that are suffering, whether it's medical health, mental health, physical health, or any other ailments that they have. I'm not just talking about here now medical, mental health. You'll have all sorts of different things, and it's become a norm. Unfortunately, we're adapting the culture of our South Asia over here now, and it's...
So is that an easy excuse, you know, Allah Pak sab kuch theek kar dega, ibadat
not.
karo, ye karo,
It's
wo
not.
karo. Do you think
No.
that is what people are?
No.
People want to hold on to something that may give them relief. So
Yeah.
because of the lack of knowledge of the medical aspects of mental health, do they go to the peers and the Maulanas and others? And they're not all Maulanas.
They're not, and,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, it's become a scam, money-making scheme, or
It is.
whatever I would use in a derogatory way, which I'm not going to use live on TV. But the unfortunate thing is, people have been, scammed out of tens of thousands of pounds. Now, moving on in terms of mental health and how to identify and what we need to do, we do need to access the services that are there, as well as hand in hand. You asked me the earlier question, spirituality, religion and Islam and mental health. Yes, it does help. Islam does help. Your spirituality does help. Your connection with your Lord, your Creator, your Sustainer of the universe, Allah Rabbul Izzah, and doing the sunnahs of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and being at one with oneself and the Creator, and going on a spiritual journey and try and be a more good practicing Muslim will help. But then on the other hand, whatever ailment, whatever physical or mental condition you have, you need to then go to the practitioners, go to the experts, go to the doctors, or seek counseling, whether it's Imam or Maulana Sahib, who's actually a trained counsellor, or if it's some services like the Sharing Voices area.
The Leeds experiment, or the study that was done, was it last year, wasn't there?
I think
There was a study done in Leeds around spirituality, Islam, faith and mental health. And one of the things that study identified was that where people became more aware of their faith, learnt more about Islam, and realized some of the values that and the principles of Islam, it then took them away from the worldly issues that were challenging them, where they were confronting some worldly issues, and it brought them to where you suggest, which is to say, look, Allah has created me. This is what Allah says I must practice. This is the way I should behave. This is the way I should run my life. And that gave them some sukoon, as they were saying, and allowed them to understand their mental health issues and then deal with it much better than had they been able to do so if they'd gone through alternative. Now, do we have any evidence of that in working in this area?
Evidence of what, sorry?
Of people accepting, going back into the faith?
Yeah, our kind of track record of delivery shows that those people that have used faith and spirituality as a platform for their recovery has worked wonders for some individuals. It works brilliant for some and maybe not for others. But going back to the issue, the biggest single problem that we have amongst the South Asian Muslim communities is that whenever they have a family member that is suffering from mental health, the first thing that they will say is that somebody has done black magic. Somebody has done jadoo.
Yes, yes.
And I can understand why, because there's a real lack of understanding about mental health and how mental health kind of manifests itself to kind of other kind of ailments, physical ailments as well. So it's easy to say that, okay, somebody has done jadoo, somebody's done ta'weez on us, because it's a simple understanding for them to have. And therefore then they will go to all these charlatan spiritual healers, and the exploitation levels of some of these people are very concerning, to be honest with you, because whenever you have vulnerable people, then you're going to, there's going to be high levels of exploitation. But really, I think it takes the debate away from individuals as to try to understand what has brought these issues about. What are the underlying factors? What are the triggers?
Why is there such a prevalence within our community? It's not just the Muslim community. I know the other South Asian communities,
of course,
have a similar issue as well.
Yeah.
That this thing about jadoo and ta'weez seems to permeate everything within our communities as well.
I think it's a
and then like you say, some of the charlatans who operate on the margins then exploit that. And so how can we challenge that? I mean, what can we do as imams, for example, as community leaders, to challenge that? Because one of the things we talked about earlier was lack of leadership around these issues. And a lot of people are falling victims to these scams. And there is a predominance of this issue within our community which is challenging us. So what can we do to try and stop some of these charlatans exploiting? I mean, don't quote me on this, but somewhere last year I read about a sister in Leeds who was taken for £20,000 by one of these charlatans. You know, she paid £20,000 in the hope, you know, this taweez and, you know, this du'as that he'll do will work for her, and nothing worked for her. And she disappeared with £20,000 of her money. So why, I'm going to ask my brothers and sisters, and please phone in, the numbers are coming up on the screen. This is a huge issue that confronts our community. Every time you turn somewhere, you hear people talking about, isko to kuch problem hai, kisi ne kuch kar diya, Maulvi sahab ko dikhao, ye karo, wo karo. And the first default is Maulvi sahab ko dikhao. And that has been ingrained in our mind, ke pehle Maulana ke paas le jao. Which I totally agree that there is a role for Maulanas to play, but in the way that you've suggested. So what can we do to try and develop better understanding within our communities and our families that there are alternatives to the norm that we've been used to? And that is something, what can we do, Mufti Sahab?
I think first and foremost, sharing voices in Bradford, in Yorkshire should I say, or any other organisation, they need to, and the masjids need to, and the imams and the leaders as such. And I say the leaders as such because it's not just the imams, because it's the committees and it's the council of mosques everywhere. Every county you'll go in, you'll have a council of mosques. They then need to realise and partner up with these kind of organisations. And then we raise the platform in terms of the madrasas. You've got thousands or tens of thousands of children going to these madrasas day in, day out, Monday to Friday, a couple of hours each evening. You have visits from drug treatment or drug awareness. You'll have visits from the local police. You'll have visits from different organisations. Why not have something from a mental health aspect? You have assemblies in madrasa. First, let's start with the young ones. Let's start with our boys and girls in the madrasa and give them the tools, give them the information. So then those children, whether they're under 10, whether they're under 12, 14, whatever they are. I mean, sadly, you have issues of harm, self-harm, I said earlier on, and you had sadly a young boy, taking his life. And these sad circumstances arise. Before these come about again, I think we need to get active and start going into these areas of masjids and madrasas. And it's all about partnership. It's not just up to one individual organisation or why are you not doing anything about it. It's a collective responsibility. And the masjids, madrasas need to play their role, the council of mosques need to play their roles, and we need to hold the local authority to account on these areas where there's deprivation and areas where high levels of BME communities are suffering in these areas. So we need to do something more than anything. And I think more importantly, our viewers will be wondering, what's all the fuss about mental health? Well, if you look at the statistics,
as I said, I mean, mental health is a huge issue that confronts our community, and we tend to put it under the carpet. We don't, it goes back to the point that Ishtiyaq made, which is about, sharam aati hai logon ko. Hamari family ka andar, it's an issue of shame that you have somebody in your family who, and to admit the fact that there's somebody in the family who may have those symptoms of mental health, and reluctant to recognize it in the first place, and B, take action to try and find solutions for that individual. I mean, that's one of the challenges.
It is a challenge,
a huge challenge.
Just continuing from what the brother said, I think the challenge is to kind of work with the mosques and madrasas. I mean, you may get some institutes who are very open, but you'll find the vast majority are not open to this. So we've in the past have approached the mosques and the mosque leaders to say perhaps we, once a month we should have a topic around mental health for the Jummah khutbah, or even to kind of ignite a debate amongst young people around mental health. What does emotional well-being mean to them? What is their understanding of emotional well-being? And really creating pathways for them to be able to express themselves freely. I mean, you said about this young chap who took his life last year in Bradford.
Yeah, the young man,
Very tragic
we're
and
going to go to a break
circumstances.
very soon, We're just going to go to a break now. Okay. So, I mean, just follow that through but that was cyberbullying as well, wasn't there?
There was elements
there's
of
huge issue of cyberbullying, which again, I don't think a lot of parents understand and recognize or are aware of it. And now, so let's follow that through about young people to adults as well.
Sure.
How do we do that? And I want to come back after the break, hopefully, about the role of imams, as you alluded to at the beginning. This thing about the imams coming into the masjid, praying 5 times a day, lock up the masjid and go, and there's no counseling support mechanism within the mosque itself, like other faith leaders provide to their communities. So I think those are some of the areas I'd like to explore. Readers, we'll be going to a break, but sorry, Ishtiaq, do you want to just continue with what happened with the young man and some of
the point I was making is that the sad thing is that this young chap actually lived next door to a mosque, and which is a place of sanctuary, it's a place of peace, it's a place of where people can go there for kind of a spiritual retreat. Yet this young man or young person had no one to turn to that he could go speak to. And I think going back to the point about mosques and madrasas is because I think there is a lack of knowledge and understanding from some of the imams around mental health. So perhaps you're right, I totally agree that the Council for Mosques or those that administer and manage the mosques need to ensure that their mosque leaders and their imams are trained appropriately, because the role of the imam is not just to lead the prayers, it's about giving support, counselling, understanding, educating people about issues, especially in the kind of modern day Britain Muslims that reside here. We've got to look at it in that context rather than in Pakistan or India.
Indeed, indeed.
Okay.
Are we
right, we're going to a break now. Jazakallah for your talk so far and for illuminating us. Brothers, we'll be coming back soon, inshallah. We're going for a break. It'll be azan time. Don't go away. This is a really important issue, and I hope that our viewers, if you get the chance, please ring in and give us your views as well. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.